Marcus Wellington adjusted his Italian silk tie as he stepped out of the towering glass building that housed Wellington Industries. The autumn wind whipped through the financial district, sending leaves spiraling across the pristine sidewalks, like tiny dancers celebrating the end of another profitable day. His custom Bentley Continental waited at the curb, its midnight blue paint gleaming under the streetlights that had just begun to flicker on as dusk settled over the city. But something was different tonight. A small white envelope sat tucked beneath his windshield wiper, pristine against the dark metal. Marcus frowned, his weathered hands reaching for the paper with the same careful precision he used to sign million-dollar contracts. Inside, written in careful, childish handwriting, were 4 simple words that would haunt him for weeks to come. "We know who you are." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The note felt impossibly light in Marcus's fingers, yet it carried a weight that seemed to press against his chest like a stone. He glanced around the bustling street, searching for any sign of who might have left it. Office workers hurried past, their faces buried in phones or hidden behind scarves, completely oblivious to the small earthquake that had just shaken the foundation of his carefully constructed world. Marcus Wellington was not a man easily rattled. At 63, he had built his empire from nothing, transforming a small family hardware store into a multinational corporation worth billions. He had weathered economic downturns, hostile takeovers, and personal scandals that would have destroyed lesser men. But standing there on the sidewalk, holding a piece of paper that a child could have written, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: genuine fear. The drive home to his estate in the hills was a blur of city lights and racing thoughts. His mansion, a sprawling testament to his success, sat perched on 15 acres of manicured grounds, complete with gardens that had been featured in architectural magazines and a driveway that curved like a ribbon through ancient oak trees. Yet tonight, as the iron gates closed behind him, the place felt less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress under siege. Marcus poured himself 3 fingers of 30-year-old scotch and settled into his leather chair in the study, the note spread out on the mahogany desk before him. The handwriting was definitely that of a child, but there was something deliberate about it, something that suggested intelligence beyond the writer's years. He studied each letter, each curve and line, as if the paper itself might reveal the identity of its author. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of shadows and whispered voices calling his name. When morning arrived, Marcus found himself checking his phone obsessively, refreshing news feeds, and scanning social media for any mention of his name or company. But the world continued its normal rotation, blissfully unaware that one of its most powerful men was slowly unraveling, because of 4 words written by a child. The second note appeared the next evening. Same white envelope, same careful placement beneath his windshield wiper. This time, the message was longer. "You left us when we needed you most, but we remember your promise." Marcus's hands trembled. As he read the words, his mind racing back through decades of decisions and consequences he had tried so hard to forget. The third night brought another message. "We are 4, but we speak as one. We have waited so long to find you." The handwriting was different this time, slightly more angular, suggesting a different author. Marcus realized with growing dread that there wasn't just one child leaving these notes. There were multiple children working together, coordinating their efforts to reach him. By the 4th note, Marcus had hired a private security firm to monitor his car and review footage from the building's cameras. But somehow, impossibly, the children remained invisible. The cameras showed his car arriving and departing, but never captured the moment when the notes appeared. It was as if they materialized from thin air, leaving no trace of their authors. The message that night was the longest yet. We know about the night you drove away and never came back. We know about the promises you made and the tears you caused. We know about the woman who loved you and the choice you made. We are the consequence of that choice. Marcus stared at the words until they blurred together, his scotch forgotten, as memories he had buried deep began to claw their way to the surface. 27 years ago, he had been a different man, younger, more reckless, driven by ambition that left little room for anything else. There had been a woman, Elena Rodriguez, with eyes like dark honey and a laugh that could light up a room. She had worked as a translator for his company's international division, and their relationship had been a whirlwind of stolen moments and whispered promises. But when Eleanor had told him she was pregnant, Marcus had faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. His company was in the middle of a crucial merger, one that would either catapult him into the upper echelons of wealth and power or destroy everything he had worked to build. The board members were old-fashioned men who valued stability and traditional values. A scandal involving an unmarried pregnant employee could have ruined everything. So Marcus had made the calculation that had haunted him ever since. He had offered Elena money, more than enough to disappear and start a new life somewhere far away. He had convinced himself it was the practical solution, the smart business decision. Elena had looked at him with those honey-colored eyes filled with tears and disappointment, and she had taken the money and vanished from his life. The merger had been successful. Wellington Industries had grown beyond his wildest dreams. But in the quiet moments between board meetings and business dinners, Marcus had wondered about Elena and the child she carried. He had hired investigators over the years, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to trace her movements. But Elena Rodriguez had disappeared as completely as if she had never existed at all. Now, sitting in his study with the children's, notes spread across his desk like pieces of a puzzle he was afraid to solve, Marcus began to understand the terrible mathematics of his past. Elena hadn't been carrying one child, she had been carrying four. Quadruplets, 4 children who had grown up without a father, who had somehow found their way back to him after more than 2 decades of absence. The 5th note arrived on a Friday evening, and its message was different from the others. Tomorrow we will reveal ourselves. Meet us at Riverside Park by the old carousel at 3 in the afternoon. Come alone. It's time you knew what your choice cost us all. Marcus spent that night pacing his mansion like a caged animal, his mind cycling through every possible scenario. Part of him wanted to ignore the message, to hire more security and retreat further into his fortress of wealth and isolation. But a larger part, the part that had been growing stronger with each passing note, knew that he had to face whatever consequences awaited him. Saturday afternoon found Marcus walking through Riverside Park with legs that felt like lead. The park was busy with families enjoying the crisp autumn weather, children laughing on swings while parents pushed strollers along the winding paths. The old carousel sat at the heart of the park, its painted horses frozen in eternal gallop, their bright colors faded by decades of sun and rain. Marcus approached slowly, his eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of the children who had been haunting his nights. And then he saw them. 4 young people, probably in their early 20s, sat on a bench facing the carousel. Even from a distance, the family resemblance was unmistakable. They had Elena's dark hair and olive complexion, but Marcus could see traces of his own features in the sharp line of their jaws and the intelligent gleam in their eyes. The first was a young woman with Elena's gentle face, but a steeliness in her posture that spoke of hard-won strength. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Next to her sat a young man whose restless energy was visible even in stillness, his hands moving constantly as if conducting some invisible orchestra. The third was another young woman, smaller than her sister, but with an intensity that made the air around her seem to vibrate. The fourth was a young man who watched the world with the careful eyes of someone who had learned not to trust easily. As Marcus drew closer, he realized they were all staring directly at him. There was no surprise in their faces, no uncertainty about his identity. They had known exactly what he looked like, had probably studied photographs of him for years, preparing for this moment. "Marcus Wellington," the first young woman said as he stopped in front of their bench. Her voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of emotion that made his chest tighten. "Thank you for coming." Marcus tried to speak but found his voice had abandoned him. Up close, the resemblance to Elena was even more pronounced, and the similarity to his own younger self was undeniable. These were his children, the consequence of a choice he had made in a boardroom 27 years ago. "I'm Sophia," the young woman continued. "These are my siblings, Diego, Carmen, and Luis. We are the Rodriguez Quadruplets. We are also your children." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each syllable confirming what he had begun to suspect but had been too afraid to fully acknowledge. He sank onto the bench across from them, his legs finally giving out under the weight of recognition and regret. "How did you find me?" he managed to whisper. "It wasn't difficult," Diego said, his voice carrying a hint of the restless energy that had been visible in his movements. "Wealthy men like you leave digital footprints everywhere. Social media posts, business articles, charity events. We've been watching you for years, learning about your life, your successes, your carefully curated image." Carmen leaned forward, her intense gaze never wavering from Marcus's face. "We wanted to understand what kind of man abandons 4 children before they're even born. What kind of person chooses money over family?" "It wasn't like that," Marcus said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Your mother, Eleanor, she disappeared. I tried to find her. I hired investigators." "She didn't disappear," Luis interrupted, his quiet voice somehow more cutting than if he had shouted. "She ran because you gave her an ultimatum that no woman should ever have to face." Sophia reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. From it, she extracted a photograph that she handed to Marcus with steady hands. The picture showed Elena, heavily pregnant, standing in front of a small apartment building. Her face was thinner than Marcus remembered, marked by stress and exhaustion, but her hand rested protectively over her swollen belly. "This was taken 3 weeks before we were born," Sophia said quietly. "She was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in East Portland, working double shifts at a factory to save money for when the babies came. She never spent a penny of what you gave her on herself. She saved every dollar for us." Marcus stared at the photograph, his vision blurring as emotions he had suppressed for decades threatened to overwhelm him. "I didn't know there were 4 of you. If I had known, would it have made a difference?" Carmen asked sharply. "Would knowing there were 4 children instead of 1 have changed your calculation? Would it have made us worth more than your business merger?" The question hung in the air between them, and Marcus found he couldn't answer it. Because the terrible truth was that he didn't know. 27 years ago, he had been a different person, driven by ambition and the intoxicating promise of unlimited power. He wanted to believe he would have made a different choice, but honesty compelled him to admit that he simply didn't know. "Tell me about her," Marcus said finally, his voice breaking on the words. "Tell me about Elena. Is she died when we were 15, Luis said, his quiet words falling like stones into still water. "Cancer. She fought it for 2 years, working right up until the end because she couldn't afford to stop. She never remarried, never had other children. She said she had given all her love to us and had none left for anyone else. Marcus felt something break inside his chest, a pain so sharp and immediate that he wondered if he might be having a heart attack. Elena was gone, had been gone for years, and he would never have the chance to apologize for the choice that had shaped both their lives. "She used to tell us stories about you," Sophia continued, her voice softer now. "Not angry stories, but sad ones. She said you were brilliant and driven, that you could have been a good father if you had chosen to be. She made us promise that we would never hate you for the choice you made, that hatred would only poison our own hearts. But we never promised not to find you," Diego added with a bitter smile. "We never promised not to let you know what your choice cost all of us." Carmen pulled out another photograph, this one showing 4 children around 10 years old, dressed in mismatched clothes, but wearing identical, determined expressions. "This was us the Christmas after Elena died. We were in the foster system by then, split up into different homes because nobody wanted to take 4 teenagers. We only saw each other on supervised visits." The next photograph showed the Quadruplets, as teenagers reunited in what appeared to be a group home. They looked older than their years, marked by experiences that no children should have to endure. But they were together, their arms around each other's shoulders, their unity unbroken despite everything they had been through. "We made a pact that night," Luis said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "We promised each other that we would find our way back to each other, and that someday we would find you, not for revenge, but for closure. We needed you to know that we existed, that we had survived, that we had become something despite your absence." Marcus looked up from the photographs to find 4 pairs of eyes watching him with a mixture of pain, anger, and something else. Something that looked almost like hope. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We want you to know who we are," Sophia said simply. "We want you to understand what we accomplished without you." Diego graduated summa cum laude from MIT with a degree in engineering. Carmen has a doctorate in social work and runs a program for foster children. Luis is a nurse who works in pediatric oncology, and I'm a teacher who specializes in helping children who have been through trauma. Each accomplishment hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because they weren't impressive, but because they were. These 4 young people had risen above circumstances that would have broken most people. They had taken the worst hand life could deal them and played it with such skill and determination that they had emerged victorious despite everything working against them. "We became successful not because we had a father's guidance and support," Carmen said, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom, "but because we had each other. We were our own support system, our own cheering section, our own family. But there was always a hole," Diego added, his restless hands finally still, "a space where a father should have been. We didn't want your money or your name or your connections. We just wanted to know why we weren't worth fighting for." The words pierced Marcus to his core because they revealed a truth he had been running from for 27 years. He hadn't fought for them because fighting would have been inconvenient. He had chosen the path of least resistance, the one that preserved his carefully planned future while sacrificing theirs. "I was a coward," Marcus said, the admission ripping from his throat like a physical wound. "I was selfish and ambitious, and I convinced myself that what I was doing was practical. But the truth is, I was just afraid. Afraid of responsibility, afraid of failure, afraid of anything that might derail the future I had planned for myself." Sophia nodded slowly, as if she had been waiting years to hear those words. "That's all we wanted to hear, not excuses or justifications, just honesty. We needed to know that you understood what your choice meant." Marcus looked around the park, at the families playing together, at the children laughing on the carousel, at the simple joy of people who had made different choices than he had. When he turned back to his children, and he could finally think of them that way, he saw Elena's strength in their faces, her resilience in their posture, her love in the way they instinctively moved closer to each other. "Can you forgive me?" he asked, though he knew he had no right to expect absolution. The quadruplets exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them that spoke of years of shared experiences and mutual support. Finally, Sophia spoke for all of them. "Forgiveness isn't something we can give you in a single conversation," she said gently. "It's something that would have to be earned over time through actions rather than words. The question is whether you're ready to do the work." Marcus felt tears he hadn't shed in decades threatening to spill over as he looked at these four remarkable young people who had somehow managed to hold on to their capacity for grace despite everything they had endured. "What would that look like?" he asked. "It would mean getting to know us as people, not as symbols of your past mistakes," Louise said quietly. "It would mean understanding that we're not Elena, and we can't fill the hole her loss left in your heart. We're our own, people with our own lives and dreams and challenges. It would mean accepting that we might not want the same things from you that you want from us," Carmen added. "We don't need a father figure at this stage in our lives, but we might be open to building something new, something that honors both who we are now and who we might have been." Diego leaned forward, his earlier restlessness replaced by focused intensity. "It would mean using your wealth and influence to help other children who are going through what we went through, not as charity or tax write-offs, but as a genuine commitment to making sure no other kids have to grow up feeling unwanted and abandoned." Marcus felt a stirring in his chest, something that felt almost like purpose awakening after years of dormancy. "I would like that," he said, his voice stronger now. "I would like the chance to try to earn your forgiveness, even if it takes the rest of my life." Sophia smiled then, the first real smile he had seen from any of them, and for a moment, Marcus caught a glimpse of the woman Elena might have become if he had made different choices all those years ago. "The rest of your life sounds like a good start," she said. As the afternoon light began to fade and families started gathering their children to head home, Marcus sat with his four children, his brilliant, resilient, extraordinary children, and began to imagine what the rest of his life might look like if he spent it trying to become worthy of their forgiveness. The notes had brought him to this moment, but the real work was just beginning. For the first time in 27 years, Marcus Wellington felt like he had a purpose that extended beyond profit margins and stock prices. He had a chance to be more than just a successful businessman. He had a chance to be a father, even if it was decades too late. The carousel continued its endless rotation as the sun set over Riverside Park, its painted horses carrying the dreams of countless children, around and around in an eternal dance of hope and possibility. And on a bench nearby, 5 people who shared the same DNA, but were essentially strangers to each other, began the delicate work of building something that might, someday, resemble a family. The weeks following that first meeting at Riverside, Park moved with the strange rhythm of 2 worlds slowly colliding. Marcus found himself checking his phone obsessively, not for stock reports or board meeting updates, but for text messages from Sophia, the designated spokesperson for the Quadruplets. Their communications started tentatively, like diplomats from warring nations testing the waters of a potential peace treaty. Sophia had suggested they meet once a week, neutral territory, no pressure. The first few meetings took place in coffee shops scattered across the city, carefully chosen locations where neither Marcus nor his children would feel trapped or overwhelmed. Marcus would arrive early, ordering the same black coffee and claiming a table near the back where they could talk without drawing attention. The Quadruplets would enter together, a unit that had learned to navigate the world as one organism with 4 parts. During their third meeting at a small cafe in the Arts District, Marcus learned that Diego had been accepted into a prestigious graduate program at Stanford, but had turned it down because he couldn't afford to leave his siblings behind. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow, another reminder of how his absence had created ripple effects he had never considered. "I could have helped with that," Marcus said quietly, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup like an anchor. "I could have made sure all of you had opportunities. We didn't want your help 27 years ago," Carmen interrupted, her voice carrying the edge that appeared whenever the conversation turned to his wealth. "We don't want it now either, at least not in the way you're thinking." Luis, ever the peacemaker among the four, leaned forward slightly. "What Carmen means is that we've learned to be self-sufficient. We've built lives that don't depend on anyone else's approval or support. That's important to us. But," Sophia added, her diplomatic nature evident in how she softened her siblings' sharper edges, "we're not opposed to building something new together. Something that honors who we all are now, not who we might have been in some alternate universe." Marcus nodded, though internally he struggled with the careful boundaries his children had constructed around themselves. His instinct was to solve problems with resources, to throw money at obstacles until they disappeared. But these four young people had spent their entire lives learning that the only resources they could truly count on were each other. The breakthrough came during their fifth meeting, this time at a small restaurant in Chinatown that Sophia had suggested. Marcus arrived to find Diego alone at their usual table, his typical restless energy replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. "The others are coming," Diego said as Marcus sat down. "They just wanted me to have a few minutes to talk to you first." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. In all their previous meetings, the Quadruplets had presented a united front, never allowing him individual access to any of them. "Is everything all right?" Diego's laugh was short and bitter. "That's a complicated question. Define all right." He paused, his fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm that seemed to calm him. "I've been thinking about what you said, about helping with opportunities. The thing is, I don't think you understand what help looks like for people like us, people like you, people who grew up in the system, people who learned that every gift comes with strings attached, that every act of kindness has a price." Diego's eyes met Marcus's directly for the first time since they had started meeting. "You want to write checks to make yourself feel better about the past, but what we need is something much harder to give." Marcus leaned forward, genuinely curious. "What do you need?" "Consistency," Diego said immediately. "The knowledge that you'll still be here next month, next year, that you won't disappear again when things get complicated or inconvenient." He paused, his jaw tightening. "We need to know that you're not going to get bored with us once the novelty wears off." The words hit Marcus harder than any accusation or angry outburst could have. Because Diego was right. Marcus's track record with long-term emotional commitments was abysmal. He had built an empire by focusing on short-term gains and strategic exits. His longest romantic relationship had lasted 3 years, ending when his partner had accused him of treating their love like a business transaction. "I understand why you would think that," Marcus said carefully. "My history doesn't exactly inspire confidence. But these meetings, getting to know all of you, it's not a novelty for me. It's the most important thing I've done in decades." Diego studied his face with the intensity of someone who had learned to read people's true intentions as a matter of survival. "Prove it," he said simply. Before Marcus could ask what that meant, the other 3 siblings arrived, sliding into the booth with the practiced efficiency of people who had shared small spaces their entire lives. Sophia looked between Marcus and Diego, clearly sensing the tension in the air. Did we miss something important? She asked. Diego was just explaining what kind of help you would actually want from me, Marcus said, surprised to find that his voice remained steady. Carmen's eyebrows rose slightly. And what conclusion did you reach? That you need consistency more than money, Marcus replied. That you need to know I won't disappear again. Luis nodded slowly. That's a start, but there's more to it than that. He glanced at his siblings, some silent communication passing between them. We've been talking, and we've decided that if we're going to do this, if we're going to try to build some kind of relationship, we need you to understand what our lives actually look like. Sophia pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse and slid it across the table to Marcus. These are our addresses, our work schedules, the places we volunteer. If you want to be part of our lives, you need to see how we actually live, not just meet us in neutral coffee shops where we can all pretend this is easy. Marcus unfolded the paper, scanning the addresses. Diego lived in a studio apartment above an auto repair shop in a neighborhood Marcus had never visited. Carmen shared a 2-bedroom house with 3 other women who worked in social services. Luis rented a small room in a boarding house near the hospital where he worked nights. Sophia had a tiny apartment near the elementary school where she taught, walking distance so she wouldn't need a car. These aren't the safest neighborhoods, Marcus said, immediately regretting how the words sounded. No, Carmen agreed, her voice sharp with challenge. They're not. They're the neighborhoods we can afford on social worker and teacher and nurse salaries. They're the neighborhoods where people understand what it means to work 3 jobs to make rent. They're our neighborhoods. Marcus looked up from the paper to find 4 pairs of eyes watching him intently, waiting to see how he would respond to this glimpse into their reality. He could feel the weight of their expectation, the test embedded in this invitation. When can I visit? He asked. Sophia smiled, the tension around the table easing slightly. Diego's working on a project in his workshop tomorrow evening. He builds furniture for families transitioning out of homelessness. If you're interested in seeing what help actually looks like, you could start there. The next evening found Marcus standing outside a converted garage in a part of the city, where his Bentley looked conspicuously out of place. He had changed clothes 3 times before settling on jeans and a sweater that he hoped struck the right balance between approachable and respectful. The sound of power tools echoed from inside. The garage, accompanied by music he didn't recognize, but that had an infectious energy. Marcus knocked on the side door, and the sounds stopped abruptly. Diego appeared a moment later, safety glasses pushed up on his forehead and sawdust coating his clothes. His expression was carefully neutral, but Marcus caught a flicker of surprise that he had actually shown up. "You came," Diego said. "You invited me," Marcus replied. "I told you I wanted to prove I could be consistent." Diego stepped aside to let him enter, and Marcus found himself in a space that was part workshop, part art studio, part organized chaos. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with tools that ranged from expensive power equipment to hand tools that looked like they had been rescued from garage sales. Half-finished furniture pieces occupied every available surface. A child's bed painted bright yellow, a kitchen table with carved legs, a bookshelf that would clearly be beautiful once the sanding was complete. "How many pieces do you make in a month?" Marcus asked, genuinely impressed by the quality of the craftsmanship. "Depends on what people need," Diego said, pulling on work gloves. "Families moving into permanent housing usually need everything. Beds, tables, chairs, storage. I try to make sure each piece is sturdy enough to last, but beautiful enough that kids feel proud to have it in their new homes." Marcus watched as Diego returned to his current project, a rocking chair that was being constructed with the kind of attention to detail that would have cost thousands of dollars in a high-end furniture store. "How do you fund this? The materials alone must be expensive." "I work construction during the day, save everything I can," Diego said, not looking up from his sanding. Sometimes I get donations of wood from contractors who have leftovers. Church groups help with hardware and finishing supplies. It's not about having unlimited resources. It's about being creative with what you have. Marcus felt a familiar itch to solve problems with his checkbook, to write a donation that would fund Diego's workshop for years, but he was beginning to understand that such an offer would miss the point entirely. This wasn't about the furniture. It was about Diego's need to create something meaningful with his own hands, to channel his energy into work that directly helped families like the one he had grown up in. "Could you teach me?" Marcus asked. Suddenly, Diego looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Teach you what?" "Woodworking, how to build something useful." Marcus gestured around the workshop. "I've spent my entire career building companies, but I've never built anything I could actually touch, anything that would make someone's life better in a concrete way." For a long moment, Diego said nothing, just studied Marcus's face, as if trying to determine whether the request was genuine. Finally, he nodded toward a pile of lumber in the corner. "There's a family getting keys to their new place next week. Single mom, 2 kids under 10. They need a toy chest that can double as seating for the living room." Marcus spent the next 3 hours learning to measure twice and cut once, discovering that his hands, so steady when signing contracts worth millions, shook when operating a circular saw. Diego was a patient teacher, correcting Marcus's grip on tools and showing him how to sand with the grain rather than against it. By the end of the evening, Marcus had managed to cut 4 pieces of wood to the correct dimensions without injuring himself or destroying the lumber. "Not bad for a first attempt," Diego said as they cleaned up the workshop. "Most people try to rush the process, but you listened to instructions." "It's harder than it looks," Marcus admitted, examining a splinter in his thumb with something that might have been pride, but satisfying in a way I didn't expect. Diego nodded. "That's the point. When that family picks up this toy chest, they'll know someone took the time to build it specifically for them. They'll know they matter to someone, even if they've never met." As Marcus drove home that night, his hands still tinged with sawdust, and his back aching from hunching over workbenches, he found himself thinking about the families who would receive Diego's furniture. He tried to imagine the moment when a child saw their new bed for the first time, painted bright and sturdy and built just for them. The thought created a warmth in his chest that felt unfamiliar but deeply satisfying. The following Saturday, Sophia invited him to observe her classroom work. Marcus arrived at Jefferson Elementary to find her setting up for a weekend tutoring program she ran for children who were struggling academically. The school was in the same neighborhood where Diego lived, and the building showed its age in cracked linoleum and fluorescent lights that hummed too loudly. Most of these kids are behind because they're dealing with trauma that makes it hard to focus, Sophia explained as she arranged art supplies on small tables. Traditional teaching methods don't work when a child is worried about whether there will be food for dinner or whether their parents will still be there when they get home. 8 children between the ages of 6 and 12 trickled into the classroom over the next half hour. They were diverse in appearance, but united in a wariness that Marcus recognized from his own children's eyes. These were kids who had learned to be careful about trusting adults, who kept their emotional walls high as a matter of survival. Marcus watched from the back of the room as Sophia worked magic that had nothing to do with traditional education. She started with art, encouraging the children to draw pictures of their feelings rather than trying to articulate them in words. She moved between tables with infinite patience, asking questions that helped kids process emotions they might not even realize they were carrying. "This is what you do all day?" Marcus asked during a break while the children worked on a group project. "This is what the job requires," Sophia replied, wiping paint from her hands. "These kids need to feel safe before they can learn anything academic. Some of them haven't eaten since yesterday's school lunch. Others slept in cars or shelters last night. You can't teach multiplication tables to a child who's worried about basic survival." Marcus found himself thinking about his own education, the private schools and expensive tutors his parents had provided without question. He had never attended class hungry or worried about having a place to sleep. The advantages he had taken for granted suddenly felt staggering. "How do you reach them?" he asked. "Consistency," Sophia said, echoing Diego's words from days earlier. "I show up every Saturday, whether 3 kids come or 30. I remember their names and their stories. I celebrate their small victories and help them process their defeats. I prove that at least one adult in their lives can be counted on." During the second half of the session, Sophia asked Marcus if he would like to help with a reading activity. He found himself sitting cross-legged on the floor with a 7-year-old named Jasmine, struggling through a picture book about a lost dog who finds his way home. Jasmine read slowly, sounding out each word with careful concentration. When she stumbled over longer words, Marcus found himself fighting the urge to jump in and correct her. But Sophia had warned him about this. These children needed to feel successful at their own pace, not rush towards someone else's expectations. "That was excellent reading," Marcus told Jasmine when they finished the book. "You worked really hard on those difficult words." Jasmine beamed up at him. "Miss Sophia says hard work is more important than being smart. She says smart is something you become, not something you are." The simple wisdom of that statement stayed with Marcus for the rest of the day. He had spent his entire life believing that intelligence was fixed, that some people were naturally gifted and others weren't. But watching these children struggle with concepts that challenged them, celebrating each small breakthrough, he began to understand that intelligence was indeed something that could be developed through persistence and support. 2 weeks later, Carmen invited him to shadow her during a typical day at the Department of Children and Family Services. Marcus had imagined social work as primarily paperwork and meetings, but he quickly discovered that Carmen's days were filled with crisis management and emotional triage. Their first stop was a home visit to check on 3 siblings who had been placed with their grandmother after their parents' arrest on drug charges. The house was small and cluttered but clean, and the grandmother greeted Carmen with the weariness of someone who had seen too much but hadn't given up hope. "How are they adjusting?" Carmen asked, settling into a chair that had clearly seen better days. "The oldest one still won't talk to me," the grandmother said. "Just sits in his room. After school, won't eat dinner with us. The little one cries every night. The middle girl keeps asking when Mama's coming home." Marcus watched Carmen work with these children, saw how she balanced gentle questioning with genuine listening. She didn't promise them that everything would be okay, a promise that would have been both false and cruel. Instead, she helped them identify feelings they couldn't name and coping strategies for dealing with uncertainty. "Their world has been turned upside down," Carmen explained to Marcus as they drove to their next appointment. "My job isn't to fix their family or make their problems disappear. My job is to help them navigate this crisis with as much stability and support as possible." Their next stop was a court hearing for a teenager who was aging out of the foster system. Marcus sat in the back of the courtroom, watching Carmen advocate for extended services that would help this young man transition to independence. The teenager, Marcus learned his name was Kevin, had been in 12 different placements since the age of 8. He was intelligent and articulate, but he had the same guarded expression Marcus had seen in his own children's eyes. "What happens to him now?" Marcus asked as they left the courthouse. "He gets an apartment and a small monthly stipend until he turns 21, Carmen said. "After that, he's on his own. No family to fall back on, no safety net if things go wrong. About 40% of kids aging out of foster care become homeless within 2 years. The statistic hit Marcus like a physical blow. 40%? These kids have never had the chance to learn life skills gradually with family support, Carmen continued. They go from being told when to wake up and what to eat straight into complete independence. Most 18-year-olds who grow up in families are still getting help with college applications and apartment deposits and learning to budget. Foster kids get cut off abruptly and expected to succeed anyway. That evening, Marcus sat in his study, surrounded by financial reports and quarterly projections, but his mind kept returning to Kevin and the other young people Carmen worked with. He thought about the furniture Diego built for families transitioning out of homelessness, about the children Sophia taught who struggled to learn while worried about basic survival, about the careful way Luis had spoken about his work with pediatric cancer patients. Each of his children had chosen careers that involved healing trauma, supporting vulnerable populations, creating stability for people who had never known it. They had taken their own experiences of abandonment and loss and transformed them into expertise in helping others navigate similar challenges. Marcus opened his laptop and began researching statistics on foster care, homelessness, and educational outcomes for children in crisis. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of young people in his city alone who faced obstacles he had never imagined. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, he found himself thinking strategically for the first time in years about something other than profit margins. By midnight, he had filled a legal pad with notes and ideas, programs that could provide extended support for foster youth aging out of the system, scholarships specifically designed for children who had experienced homelessness, mentorship programs that paired successful adults with teenagers navigating family crises, workshops that taught practical life skills to young people who had never had stable family environments. For the first time since the Quadruplets had started leaving notes on his car, Marcus felt like he understood what redemption might actually look like. It wouldn't be a single grand gesture or a large donation that made him feel better about his past choices. It would be sustained commitment to the kind of work his children had already dedicated their lives to, work that required consistency, patience, and the willingness to measure success in small victories rather than dramatic transformations. The next morning, Marcus called Sophia and asked if the four of them would be willing to meet with him, not at a coffee shop this time, but at his office. He had something he wanted to propose, and he needed their expertise to make it work. 3 days later, the Quadruplets arrived at Wellington Industries headquarters together, their unity evident even in the way they moved through the marble lobby. Marcus met them at the elevator, noting how their eyes took in the obvious wealth and power represented by the building's architecture and expensive art. His office occupied the entire top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city. Marcus had always found the view inspiring, a visual reminder of everything he had accomplished. But seeing it through his children's eyes, he wondered if it looked more like a fortress than an achievement. "Impressive," Diego said, walking to the window and looking down at the streets below. "I'm guessing the rent on this place could fund a lot of community programs." "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," Marcus said, gesturing. "For them to sit around the conference table. I've been thinking about what you've shown me over the past few weeks, about the work you're all doing and the populations you serve. I want to create a foundation." Carmen's expression immediately became skeptical. What kind of foundation? One focused on supporting young people who are transitioning out of foster care, children experiencing homelessness, families in crisis, Marcus said. "Programs that provide the kind of comprehensive support you've shown me is needed." "And you want us to run it?" Sophia asked. I want us to run it together, Marcus corrected. I can provide the funding and the business infrastructure, but you four understand the actual needs in ways I never could. I don't want to write checks and walk away. I want to be involved in the day-to-day work. Luis leaned forward slightly. What would that look like for you, getting involved in day-to-day work? Marcus had been thinking about this question for days. I want to learn what you do. Really learn it, not just observe it. I want to be trained as a mentor, to work directly with young people aging out of foster care. I want to understand the systems you navigate every day so I can help change them from the inside. The quadruplets exchanged glances, that silent communication flowing between them again. Marcus held his breath, waiting for their response. You're talking about a significant time commitment, Carmen said finally. This isn't volunteer work you can do when it's convenient. The populations we serve need consistency and reliability. I understand that, Marcus replied. I'm prepared to step back from the day-to-day operations of my company. I have excellent people who can handle things while I focus on this. Why? Diego asked bluntly. Why now? Why this? Marcus looked around the table at these four remarkable people who shared his DNA, but were essentially strangers, who had accomplished so much despite his absence from their lives. Because for the first time in 27 years, I have a chance to do something that matters, because you've shown me what my life could have been about if I had made different choices. Because I can't change the past, but maybe I can help create better futures for other families. Sophia nodded slowly. If we did this, and I'm not saying we're ready to commit, we would need guarantees, legal structures that ensure the foundations. Mission can't be changed on a whim. Board representation that includes people from the communities we serve, not just wealthy donors. We would need real power in decision-making, Carmen added, not advisory roles where we make recommendations that can be ignored. And we would need to see sustained commitment from you before we put our reputations on the line, Luis said, quietly. Our names in these communities means something. We won't risk that unless we're certain you won't disappear when things get difficult. Marcus nodded, understanding that they were asking him to prove something he had never been asked to prove before, that he could prioritize relationships over profit, that he could stick with something even when it was challenging and emotionally demanding. What would it take to convince you? He asked. The quadruplets looked at each other again, and Marcus could see the wheels turning as they considered possibilities and obstacles. Finally, Sophia spoke for the group. 6 months, she said. You spend 6 months working alongside each of us, learning what we do, proving that you can handle the emotional demands of this work. If at the end of 6 months you're still committed and we believe you understand what you're getting into, then we'll consider moving forward with the foundation. But, Diego added, his expression serious, if you disappear or lose interest or decide this is too hard, we never want to see you again. No more meetings, no more attempts at relationship. You get one chance to prove you're different from the man who walked away 27 years ago. The stakes were clear, and Marcus felt the weight of their ultimatum settle on his shoulders. 6 months to prove he could be the father and partner he had never been. 6 months to demonstrate that he was capable of sustained emotional commitment to something other than his own success. I accept, he said without hesitation. When do we start? Sophia smiled, but it was a careful smile, one that held hope in check until it could be proven justified. We start Monday. You'll spend the first month with me, working in the tutoring program and helping with home visits to families in crisis. If you can handle that, we'll move on to Diego's workshop and Carmen's caseload and Luis's hospital rounds. As the quadruplets left his office that day, Marcus found himself looking around the space that had been the center of his universe for so many years. The expensive furniture and corporate awards suddenly felt hollow, symbols of a life that had been built on the wrong foundations. In 6 months, he would either have earned the right to call himself their father, or he would have lost them forever. For the first time in his life, Marcus Wellington faced a challenge that couldn't be solved with money or strategy or ruthless determination. Success would require something much more difficult: the ability to show up consistently for other people, to prioritize their needs over his own comfort, to prove that he was capable of love that demanded sacrifice rather than simply offering benefits. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 Monday morning, a sound Marcus had never heard in his penthouse apartment before. For decades, his mornings had begun whenever he naturally woke, usually around 7, followed by a leisurely routine of coffee and financial news before his driver arrived at 9. But today marked the beginning of his 6-month trial, and Sophia had made it clear that her workday started early. Marcus stood in his walk-in closet, staring at clothes he had never worn. The designer suits that filled most of the space seemed absurdly inappropriate for a day spent working with children from struggling families. He eventually settled on khakis and a polo shirt that still had tags attached. Purchased years ago for a charity golf tournament he had ultimately skipped for a more pressing business meeting. The drive to Jefferson Elementary took him through neighborhoods he had previously only seen from highway overpasses, strip malls with hand-painted signs, apartment complexes where laundry hung from balcony railings, small houses with chain-link fences, and gardens carved out of whatever space was available. Marcus found himself slowing down, actually looking at the communities his children served rather than rushing past them toward more familiar territory. Sophia was already in her classroom when he arrived, arranging materials for what she called Breakfast Club, a program that provided food for children who might not eat otherwise. 23 kids between ages 5 and 10 would arrive over the next hour, and Sophia moved with practiced efficiency to create an environment that was both nurturing and structured. "Your job today is to observe and help where I direct you," Sophia said, as she set out juice boxes and granola bars. "These children have learned to be wary of new adults, so don't take it personally if they ignore you or seem suspicious." The first child arrived at 6:15, a girl who couldn't have been older than 6, but who moved with the careful wariness of someone much older. She nodded politely to Marcus, but immediately gravitated toward Sophia, whispering something that made Sophia's expression soften with concern. "Amelia's mom worked a double shift last night," Sophia explained quietly to Marcus. "She's tired and probably stressed about being late for school." Marcus watched as Sophia guided Amelia to the breakfast area, engaging her in gentle conversation about her favorite books while ensuring she ate something substantial. There was no rush, no pressure, just quiet consistency that seemed to ease the tension in the little girl's shoulders. By 7 o'clock, the classroom buzzed with activity as more children arrived. Marcus observed the careful choreography Sophia had developed, greeting each child individually, noting who seemed upset or hungry or excited, adjusting her approach based on what each young person needed in that moment. "Mr. Marcus," Sophia called during a brief lull, "could you help Kevin with his math homework? He's struggling with multiplication tables." Kevin was 8 years old with serious eyes that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of Luis at the same age. He approached Marcus's chair cautiously, homework sheet clutched in small hands that bore traces of marker stains and playground dirt. "I don't understand why 7 times 8 has to be different from 8 times 7, Kevin said, frustration evident in his voice. "It seems like cheating to switch the numbers around." Marcus found himself smiling at the logic. "You're right. That it seems like it shouldn't work that way. Can I show you something that might help?" For the next 20 minutes, Marcus used Sophia's manipulatives to demonstrate commutative properties in ways that made sense to Kevin's concrete thinking. When the boy finally grasped that 7 groups of 8 objects contained the same total as 8 groups of 7 objects, his face lit up with the particular joy of understanding something that had previously been mysterious. "You're pretty good at explaining things," Kevin said as he packed up his homework. "Are you going to be here tomorrow?" The question carried weight that Marcus hadn't expected. In Kevin's world, adults who showed up once rarely appeared again. "Yes," Marcus said firmly, "I'll be here tomorrow." After the children left for their regular classes, Sophia sat down across from Marcus with 2 cups of coffee that had grown cold during the morning rush. How did that feel? Marcus considered the question seriously. "Harder than I expected," he admitted. "I kept wanting to solve problems that couldn't be solved with quick fixes. Kevin mentioned that his family might be evicted next month, and my first instinct was to think about how I could prevent that." Sophia nodded. "That's natural, but Kevin doesn't need you to solve his housing crisis. His family is working with social services on that. What he needed this morning was to feel successful at math and to know that an adult cared enough to sit with him while he struggled with something difficult." "The distinction is important," Marcus said, beginning to understand. "It's the difference between charity and relationship," Sophia agreed. "Charity maintains distance. You write a check or solve a problem and then move on. Relationship means showing up consistently, even when you can't fix everything, even when the problems are bigger than your resources." Over the following weeks, Marcus fell into the rhythm of Sophia's work. He learned to recognize which children arrived hungry and which ones came to school carrying stress from home. He discovered that Miguel's aggressive behavior stemmed from anxiety about his father's deployment, that Jasmine's difficulty concentrating coincided with periods when her family was staying in shelters, that David's perfectionism masked a deep fear of disappointing adults who might abandon him. "These children are carrying burdens that would challenge most adults," Sophia explained one afternoon as they cleaned up after tutoring session. "My job isn't to take those burdens away. That's not possible. My job is to create a space where they can set those burdens down for a few hours and remember that they're children who deserve patience and encouragement." The work was emotionally exhausting in ways Marcus had never anticipated. He found himself lying awake at night, thinking about Amelia's worry that her mother was working too hard, about Kevin's quiet acceptance that moving was just something that happened to families like his, about Miguel's anger at a world that had taken his father away. But there were also moments of pure joy that Marcus had never experienced in any boardroom. The day Kevin finally mastered long division and insisted on teaching the process to 2 younger children. The morning Amelia brought a drawing she had, made of her family, and proudly included Marcus as the man who helps with math. The afternoon, Miguel asked if Marcus could teach him to play chess because smart people like you probably know how to do that. After 4 weeks with Sophia, Marcus transitioned to working with Diego in his workshop. The physical demands of construction work challenged muscles Marcus had forgotten he possessed, but he discovered unexpected satisfaction in the tangible nature of the labor. Unlike his corporate work, where success was measured in abstract numbers and market positions, building furniture produced results he could touch and see. "Measure twice, cut once," Diego reminded him for the 100th time, as Marcus prepared to cut boards for a bunk bed destined for a family with 3 children sharing 1 bedroom. Impatience ruins more projects than inexperience. Marcus had always prided himself on quick decision-making and rapid execution, but woodworking demanded a different pace, careful planning, and patient attention to detail. When he rushed, joints didn't fit properly and finishes came out uneven. When he slowed down and focused on each step, the work became almost meditative. "Why furniture?" Marcus asked one evening as they applied stain to a dining table that would be delivered the next day. "You could build houses or commercial projects. That would pay much better." Diego continued working in steady strokes, ensuring even coverage across the wood grain. "When I was 12, I spent 6 months in a placement where the foster dad was into woodworking. He taught me to use tools properly, showed me how to see potential in raw materials." He paused, examining his work before continuing. "It was the first time an adult had ever trusted me with something valuable, expected me to create rather than just consume or survive." "What happened to him?" "Budget cuts," Diego said simply. "The state reduced payments to foster families, and he couldn't afford to keep me. I got moved to a group home where the focus was containment rather than development." He set down his brush and looked directly at Marcus. "That's why consistency matters so much to us. We've all experienced what it feels like when adults give up on you because circumstances change." The message was clear, and Marcus felt the weight of his 6-month trial settling more heavily on his shoulders. His children weren't just testing his commitment to their work. They were testing whether he was capable of the kind of unwavering reliability they had never experienced, but desperately needed. Working with Carmen proved to be the most emotionally challenging part of Marcus's education. Social work involved navigating systems that were simultaneously essential and broken, advocating for families while working within bureaucracies that moved too slowly for children in crisis. Marcus's first day shadowing Carmen began with a court hearing for a teenager named Ashley, who had been removed from her home after her stepfather's arrest for domestic violence. Ashley sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, her belongings contained in 2 garbage bags, her expression a mask of forced indifference that Marcus recognized from his own children's faces. "The goal is family reunification whenever possible," Carmen explained as they waited for Ashley's case to be called. "Ashley's mother has completed parenting classes and anger management. Her housing situation has stabilized and she's maintained employment for 6 months. But Ashley has been in care for 18 months and she's not sure she wants to go home." "What does Ashley want?" Marcus asked. "Ashley wants guarantees that no one can give her," Carmen replied. "She wants to know that her stepfather will never come back, that her mother will choose her over any future romantic partners, that she'll never again have to pack her belongings in the middle of the night and leave with strangers." During the hearing, Marcus watched Carmen present Ashley's case with careful professionalism, advocating for a gradual transition that would allow Ashley to test her mother's commitment while maintaining the safety net of foster care. The judge listened patiently, but made it clear that resources were limited and decisions had to be made. Family reunification with supervised visitation initially, transitioning to full custody over 6 months pending compliance with court orders. The judge ruled. Ashley's reaction was barely visible, a slight tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible slump in her shoulders. But Marcus saw it, and he understood that this young woman was facing the same impossible choice his own children had faced. Years earlier, trust adults who had already proven unreliable or remain in a system that offered safety but not love. "How do you handle cases like this?" Marcus asked Carmen as they left the courthouse. "You remember that perfect solutions don't exist," Carmen replied. "You fight for the best possible outcome given the resources available, and you maintain relationships with kids like Ashley so they know someone is keeping track of how things turn out." Now, over the 6 weeks Marcus spent working with Carmen, he learned to navigate the complex web of services, regulations, and competing priorities that define child welfare work. He sat in on meetings where dedicated professionals struggled to place children with special needs in homes equipped to handle their requirements. He observed family therapy sessions where parents worked to heal trauma while children tested whether this time would be different. The work required emotional resilience that Marcus wasn't sure he possessed. Unlike his corporate career, where setbacks could be analyzed and corrected through strategic adjustments, social work involved accepting that some problems couldn't be solved. Some families couldn't be saved. Some children would age out of the system without ever experiencing stable family relationships. The hardest part, Carmen told him one afternoon, after a particularly difficult case, is maintaining hope when you see the same patterns repeating generation after generation. Parents who were failed by the system raising children who will likely be failed by the system unless something interrupts the cycle. What interrupts the cycle? Marcus asked. Sometimes it's a teacher who refuses to give up on a kid. Sometimes it's a mentor who provides consistent support through the transition to adulthood. Sometimes it's a social worker who maintains contact long after the case is officially closed. Carmen looked at him directly. Sometimes it's a biological parent who finally decides to show up and do the work, even when it's 27 years too late. Marcus's time with Luis in the pediatric oncology ward proved to be simultaneously the most heartbreaking and most inspiring part of his education. The children's hospital occupied a world where normal rules didn't apply, where 6-year-olds spoke casually about chemotherapy side effects and teenagers planned for futures that might not exist. Luis worked the night shift, which meant Marcus found himself in the hospital from 11 in the evening until 7 in the morning, learning to navigate the particular challenges of caring for seriously ill children during the lonely hours when families went home and regular routines disappeared. Night shift is when the fear comes out, Luis explained, as they made rounds through the ward. During the day, there are distractions. Doctors making rounds, therapists working on exercises, family members visiting. At night, kids are alone with their thoughts and their pain. Marcus learned to read the subtle signs that indicated which children were struggling. The 10-year-old with leukemia who asked for water every few minutes because swallowing helped distract from nausea. The teenage girl with bone cancer who pretended to sleep when her anxiety became overwhelming. The 7-year-old boy who told elaborate stories about adventures he would have when he got better. "How do you do this every night?" Marcus asked Luis during a break in their rounds. "How do you invest emotionally in children who might not survive?" Luis was quiet for a long moment, checking monitors and adjusting IV drips with practiced efficiency. "You focus on today," he said finally. "You can't cure cancer or guarantee outcomes, but you can make sure that tonight this child feels heard and cared for. You can be present for whatever time you have." Marcus found himself thinking about time differently during those weeks in the hospital. In his corporate life, time had been a resource to be maximized, productivity measured in tasks completed and deals closed. But in the children's ward, time became something more precious. Moments of connection that mattered regardless of their duration. The night that changed everything for Marcus came during his final week with Luis. A new patient arrived around midnight, a 4-year-old named Danny, who had been diagnosed with brain cancer. Danny's parents were barely older than Marcus's own children, and their terror was palpable as they tried to comfort their son while absorbing medical information that no parent should have to understand. Marcus found himself assigned to sit with Danny while his parents met with doctors to discuss treatment options. The little boy was scared and disoriented, asking for his mother every few minutes and crying when told she would be back soon. "I want to go home," Danny whispered, his small hand gripping Marcus's fingers with surprising strength. "I know you do," Marcus replied, surprising himself with how naturally the words came. "Being in the hospital is scary, but the doctors and nurses here are very good at helping kids feel better." "Are you a doctor?" Danny asked. No, I'm just a friend who's learning how to help kids, Marcus said. What's your favorite thing to do at home? For the next 2 hours, Marcus listened to Danny describe his collection of toy trucks, his dog named Buster, and his big sister who let him sleep in her bed during thunderstorms. When Danny finally fell asleep, Marcus remained by his bedside, watching the rise and fall of small chest, understanding for the first time what Luis meant about focusing on today. Danny's parents returned to find Marcus still holding their son's hand. The father, a young man who looked like he hadn't slept in days, shook Marcus's hand with gratitude that seemed disproportionate to the simple act of sitting with a frightened child. Thank you for staying with him, Danny's mother whispered. He's been so scared, and you helped him feel safe. Walking out of the hospital that morning, Marcus found himself thinking about all the children he had met over the past 6 months. Kevin wrestling with multiplication tables while worrying about eviction. Ashley facing the choice between an imperfect family and institutional safety. Danny asking for his mother while confronting a diagnosis no child should have to face. Each of these children needed something Marcus was finally beginning to understand. Not solutions to their problems, but adults who would show up consistently and remain present through difficulty. They needed people who would invest in their lives, without expecting immediate returns, who would celebrate small victories and provide comfort during defeats. The 6 months ended on a Tuesday evening in May. Marcus had spent the day working with Diego on a bedroom set for a family transitioning out of homelessness, his hands now calloused and confident with tools that had once intimidated him. As they cleaned up the workshop, Diego looked at Marcus with an expression that had evolved from skepticism to something that might have been respect. So, what's the verdict? Marcus asked, not sure he was ready for the answer. The verdict is that you showed up, Diego replied. Every day, even when it was hard, even when you couldn't fix things. That's more than we expected. 2 days later, all 4 siblings met with Marcus at Sophia's apartment, the first time he had been invited into any of their personal spaces. The apartment was small but warm, filled with books and artwork created by her students, photos of the quadruplets at various ages documenting their journey from children to adults. We've been talking, Sophia said, as they settled around her kitchen table. And we've reached a decision about the foundation. Marcus held his breath, realizing that his entire future relationship with his children depended on the next words out of Sophia's mouth. We're willing to move forward, Carmen said, but with conditions. The foundation will be structured as a true partnership, with all 5 of us having equal voice in major decisions. The mission and values will be locked in legally so they can't be changed without unanimous consent. The work will be hard, Luis added quietly, emotionally demanding in ways that corporate work isn't. There will be failures and frustrations that can't be solved by throwing more money at problems. And there will be times when you'll want to quit, Diego said bluntly. When the bureaucracy seems impossible to navigate, when kids you've invested in make choices that hurt them, when the problems feel bigger than anything we could possibly address. Marcus nodded, understanding that they were giving him one final chance to back out before committing to something that would change all their lives. I want to do this work, he said simply, not because I think it will absolve me of past mistakes, but because it's the most meaningful thing I've ever had the opportunity to be part of, and because I want to continue learning from all of you. Sophia smiled, and this time there was no wariness in her expression, no careful holding back of hope. Then let's build something together. The foundation launched 6 months later, in a converted warehouse in the same neighborhood where Diego lived. The space included offices for staff, meeting rooms for support groups, a workshop where young people could learn job skills, and a commercial kitchen where families could access fresh food and cooking classes. Marcus had stepped back from daily operations at Wellington Industries, maintaining his role as chairman while delegating management responsibilities to executives who had been waiting years for the opportunity. For the first time in his adult life, his calendar was filled with appointments that had nothing to do with profit margins or market share. On a cold morning in December, Marcus stood in the foundation's main room watching Diego teach woodworking. Skills to 6 teenagers aging out of foster care. Across the hall, Sophia ran a literacy program for children whose families were experiencing housing instability. Carmen worked with parents navigating the child welfare system, helping them understand their rights and access resources. Luis had developed a medical advocacy program that helped families communicate with healthcare providers when children faced serious illnesses. The work was exactly as challenging as his children had warned him it would be. Some days brought victories, a young person securing stable housing, a family successfully reuniting after months of separation, a child mastering academic skills that had previously seemed impossible. Other days brought heartbreak, teenagers making choices that endangered their futures, families unable to overcome generational patterns of dysfunction, children facing circumstances no amount of support could completely address. But Marcus had learned to measure success differently. Instead of quarterly reports and annual growth targets, he tracked smaller victories: the number of young people who maintained stable housing for 6 months, the percentage of children who improved their reading levels, the families who developed skills to navigate crises without losing their children to the system. "You've changed," Sophia told him one evening as they locked up the foundation offices. "I don't mean just your work or your schedule. I mean you as a person." Marcus considered her observation as they walked to their cars. She was right. The man who had built Wellington Industries would barely recognize the person he had become. The corporate executive who had measured everything in terms of return on investment now found himself invested in outcomes that couldn't be quantified on spreadsheets. "Being your father has changed me," he replied, "learning to see the world through your eyes, understanding what you've overcome and what you've accomplished. It's made me want to be better than I ever thought I needed to be." Sophia hugged him goodnight, a gesture that still felt miraculous after months of gradually building trust. As Marcus drove home through neighborhoods he now knew intimately, he thought about the notes that had started this journey. 4 anonymous messages that had forced him to confront choices he had spent decades avoiding. His children had written that they knew who he was, but the truth was more complex. They had seen who he could become, had challenged him to grow into a person worthy of their respect and love. The foundation was successful not because of his wealth or business experience, but because it was built on relationships that demanded authenticity and sustained commitment. Marcus parked in his driveway and looked up at the mansion that had once represented everything he thought he wanted. The house was still beautiful, still impressive, but it no longer felt like the center of his universe. Home was wherever his children were, wherever the work of healing and building community was happening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: teenagers struggling with addiction, families facing eviction, children whose trauma made learning difficult. But it would also bring new opportunities to prove that consistency was possible, that adults could be trusted to show up when needed, that family could be built through choice and commitment rather than just shared DNA. As Marcus walked toward his front door, he realized that the quadruplets had given him something more valuable than forgiveness. They had given him the chance to discover that it was never too late to become the person he should have been all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.